I never imagined that one simple action, one flicker of fire against the alien darkness would change everything. Stranded, alone, and miles away from the wreckage of my shuttle, I had only the essentials: my suit, my survival pack, and the stubborn hope that someone, or something, would notice me. The landscape stretched endlessly, a mix of jagged rocks and shadowy forests, under a sky painted in strange hues of violet and amber. It was beautiful, almost hypnotic, and yet it carried a sense of danger I couldn't shake. I knew I was not truly alone, not here, not ever. The fire was my first act of desperation. I had scavenged some dry twigs and a few fuel cells from the shuttle wreck. My hands were trembling, not just from the cold but from the reality of being completely isolated on an alien world. I struck the ignition, and the flame flickered to life. Warmth enveloped me, the orange glow bouncing across the barren terrain. For a moment, I allowed myself a breath of relief, thinking only of the comfort of heat, the faint hope that rescuers might see the signal. But there was more to this planet than just survival. I noticed them the moment the fire cast its first shadows. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, shapes dancing in the periphery. Then I saw movement, graceful, deliberate, and terrifying. Figures emerged from the forest's edge. They were humanoid, yes, but not human. Their limbs were elongated, lean and muscular, perfect for hunting. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the firelight like twin embers. Every step they took was measured, silent, almost ceremonial. My pulse quickened. They were beautiful, predatory, and they were watching me. I realized then that this fire, meant to be a signal of hope, had become a summons. Somehow it had drawn them out of hiding. My mind raced with questions. Were they hostile, curious, or merely territorial? I could not afford mistakes, not with these creatures now studying me like I was some anomaly in their world. Every instinct screamed caution, yet something deeper, almost primitive, urged me to observe, to understand before acting. As I crouched near the flames, I noticed patterns in their behavior. They moved in pairs and trios, scanning the surroundings, occasionally glancing back at each other with a communication that was wordless but unmistakably sophisticated. Their movement suggested hunting techniques honed over centuries. This wasn't random wandering. This was strategy. Intelligence beyond my expectations, beyond what we often give alien species in our stories. I realized that humanity often underestimates intelligence that doesn't mirror our own. That assumption might have cost me my life here. The largest among them stepped forward, almost deliberately as if to take the lead. Her armor, or perhaps natural plating, glimmered under the firelight, smooth yet lethal. Her posture was upright, unafraid, a queen among hunters, and I understood almost immediately that she was evaluating me, not just my physical presence, but my choices, my intentions. In that instant, I felt the weight of millennia of evolution press down on me, a reminder that I was a guest on their world, fragile and unprepared. I tried to communicate, slowly raising my hands, showing the universal symbol of peace. The flame flickered between us, and I dared a small smile, hoping my human gestures meant something here. The lead huntress paused, tilting her head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost curious. The others mirrored her movements, circling, silently, a pattern of reconnaissance that humans would call tactical, intelligent, deliberate. And then I realized that this was not just survival. This was observation, a test of worthiness, perhaps even morality. I remembered the rescue training drilled into me back on Earth, the countless simulations, the scenarios of first contact. None of them had prepared me for this. They had drilled me for hostile confrontations with intelligent species, but these beings didn't fit the template. They were neither immediately hostile nor immediately friendly. They existed on a spectrum we rarely acknowledge. The fire, a simple act meant to signal distress, had ignited a chain of events far beyond my understanding. As I settled into cautious observation, I noticed their tools. They carried weapons, yes, but they were extensions of themselves, organic, adaptive, far more integrated than any human technology I had encountered. Swords curved like flowing water, bows with sinew that seemed to hum with tension, almost alive. I realized that these huntresses were not merely defenders of their land. They were artists, warriors, and scientists all at once, blending biology and technology in a way humans might envy. Their very presence demanded respect. Time became an abstract concept. Minutes or hours passed, I could not tell. I tried speaking, modulating my voice carefully, making soft, non-threatening sounds. The lead huntress reacted, stepping slightly, closer, as if she could understand intention through tone alone. My heart raced, but I forced myself to remain still, documenting every detail mentally. The way her eyes followed me, the subtle movements of her limbs, the coordinated patterns of the others. It was a lesson in adaptation and survival. I began to feel small, yes, but also part of something larger, something ancient. I realized that the fire was a mirror, reflecting not just light but the nature of interaction. By lighting it, I had revealed myself, my vulnerability, and my intentions. In a strange way, it was also a test for them. Would they respect the honesty of my signal or exploit it? The huntresses paused, communicated silently with one another through gestures that were almost imperceptible. Then, to my amazement, they began to mimic my posture, crouching low, observing, learning. I felt a flicker of connection, fragile and fleeting, but real. And then came the moment of choice. The lead huntress stepped forward, closer than any of the others, her eyes locked with mine. She moved deliberately, her weapon held loosely, not in aggression but in potential readiness. It was a moment of mutual evaluation. I had survived this long by reading cues, by trusting instinct, and now instinct told me that this encounter was pivotal. Every decision mattered. A single wrong move and the fragile thread of trust would snap. I did something almost unconsciously. I gestured toward the fire, then toward myself, trying to convey my dependence on survival, not conquest. The huntress hesitated, then lowered her weapon slightly, a gesture of tentative acceptance. Around us, the others adjusted their positions, some keeping distance, others inching closer. The air was thick with tension, yet there was understanding forming, a language that did not need words. As the fire burned, I noticed the terrain more closely. The forest beyond seemed alive with eyes and movement, not just the huntresses in front of me. Every rustle, every shadow suggested an ecosystem that had survived eons, shaped by intelligence and adaptation, not just chance. I realized that the planet itself was a character in this story, a living entity with guardians that operated beyond human comprehension. We often assume intelligence is human-centric, but here, it was everywhere, woven into the very fibers of life. Hours passed, and I began to experiment carefully. I moved slowly, collecting small samples, taking measurements, testing the limits of my interaction. The huntresses watched, never intruding, yet always present. I realized that this was a dance, not a confrontation. Their patience was a lesson. In our rush, humans often mistake speed for competence, aggression for power, and dominance for understanding. Here time was a teacher, and I was the student. I also realized the psychological impact on me. Fear was natural, yes, but awe, respect, and humility were taking its place. The fire that had summoned them was no longer a mere signal. It was a catalyst for growth. I began to see patterns in their movements, strategies in their hunting techniques, and even cultural nuances in how they interacted with one another. They were intelligent in ways that transcended the traditional human definitions. The term huntress barely captured their complexity. They were warriors, diplomats, and scholars of survival all at once. Food, water, and shelter became secondary concerns. Observation became survival. Understanding them became survival. I began to speak softly, narrating my actions, almost like a journal, but aloud. The lead huntress tilted her head at my voice, perhaps recognizing the rhythm, the intention, the honesty behind my words. It was as though communication could transcend biology, transcending language entirely. I noticed something remarkable. They were curious about me, just as I was about them. Each small action I took, every tool I used, every fire crackle, became data for them. They did not approach with hostility, nor with simple fascination. They were analyzing, learning, assessing my role in this ecosystem, And in return, I began to understand them, not as monsters or threats, but as custodians of a delicate balance, fierce, yet protective. The sun, or what passed for it here, began to rise, casting the alien sky in soft pinks and golden ambers. I realized I had survived the night, yes, but I had also crossed an invisible threshold. The Huntresses were no longer merely observers. They were participants in my story, and I in theirs. I understood instinctively that my survival depended not on escaping them, but on coexisting, learning, and respecting their presence.